The German invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939, is generally regarded as the beginning of World War II, though it initially began as a regional conflict between neighboring states. The Second Polish Republic had declared independence in 1918, with its western borders established by the Treaty of Versailles, though violent clashes in former German territories persisted until 1921. Its eastern borders were confirmed only after a bitter war with Soviet Russia, which also ended in 1921, yet neither Germany nor the Soviet Union accepted this new order. Both viewed the Polish state as an illegitimate creation of the Versailles system they despised, and both maintained territorial ambitions over Polish lands. Despite this, Warsaw signed non-aggression pacts with Moscow in 1932 and with Berlin in 1934. This fragile peace, however, concealed the true intentions of Poland's neighbors. German dictator Adolf Hitler had long seen expansion eastward as essential for acquiring Lebensraum for the German people, and he, along with many other Germans, sought to reclaim the lands ceded to Poland in 1919. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin's goals remain debated. Some historians believe he wanted to restore the lands of the Tsarist Empire. Others that he aimed to push the Soviet border westward for security, or simply seize territory whenever possible. Regardless, the Soviet regime considered Poles enemies and targeted them heavily during the Great Terror of 1937-1938. In 1938, Nazi Germany annexed parts of Czechoslovakia following the Munich Agreement, and Poland also took a small section with German approval. Warsaw had previously seen the USSR as the greater threat, but after Munich, Germany shifted its focus toward Poland. German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop demanded a resolution to the German-Polish question, including claims over the free city of Danzig, formerly part of Germany, but now administered by Poland under the League of Nations. Berlin accused Warsaw of blocking German access to East Prussia, while German Nazis in Danzig stirred unrest. Poland's semi-authoritarian government, led by Prime Minister Felicjan Składkowski, turned to France and Britain for support. Both pledged to defend Poland if Germany attacked. By mid-1939, war appeared inevitable to Polish commander Marshal Edward Rydz-Śmigły. "We will make every effort to resolve the Danzig issue peacefully. But if Germany insists on annexation, Poland will fight, even alone. The entire nation, to the last man and woman, stands ready to defend our independence." Hitler doubted Britain and France would honor their promises, but wanted to avoid a two-front war. Thus, Germany offered the Soviets a deal. Despite being fierce ideological enemies, the Nazis and Soviets shared a desire to overturn Europe's existing order and expand their territories. On August 23, 1939, they stunned the world by signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression agreement. In a secret clause, they divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Germany would dominate Western Poland, Lithuania, and former Czechoslovakia, while the USSR gained freedom in Finland, the Baltic states, Eastern Poland, and Bessarabia. War was now inevitable. In late August, Germany staged several false flag operations along the border to justify invasion. SS operatives under Reinhard Heydrich, disguised in Polish uniforms, raided a radio station at Gliwice, a customs post, and other sites. They brought prisoners from Sachsenhausen and a local Polish sympathizer, dressed them as Polish soldiers, executed them, and photographed their bodies as fake evidence of Polish aggression. Although these incidents achieved little, they served their purpose. Germany's invasion plan, Fall Weiss, Case White, called for attacks from both north and south. Two armies would strike from East Prussia toward Warsaw, while three others advanced from the south toward Warsaw and Lwów, modern Lviv. The Slovak state allowed German troops to pass through its territory. Supported by the Luftwaffe, armored and motorized divisions aimed to trap Polish forces west of the Vistula River. To execute Case White, Germany assembled 1.5 million troops, 3,200 armored vehicles, and 2,000 aircraft, though most tanks were outdated Panzer I and II models, with only about 300 modern Panzers III and IV. Of its 50 divisions, 6 were armored, 4 motorized, and the rest reliant on horses. Slovakia contributed 3 divisions. Opposing them were about 1 million Polish soldiers in 38 infantry divisions, 1 motorized, and 11 cavalry brigades. They possessed around 1,100 armored vehicles, most obsolete, and a weak air force with about 750 outdated planes. Under pressure from Britain and France, Poland delayed full mobilization to avoid provoking Germany, so by September 1st, only half its forces were positioned for defense. Poland's strategy faced impossible choices. Concentrating troops risked losing vital territory, while defending the entire border left them too stretched to hold. The High Command chose an all-around defense, hoping to resist long enough for... Their French allies were expected to launch their promised offensive 15 days after France completed mobilization. On the morning of September 1st, Hitler falsely accused the Polish army of attacking German territory and declared that Germany was merely returning fire. German troops surged across the border, with armored divisions tasked to break through Polish defenses and advance rapidly to encircle and isolate slower enemy formations. Dive bombers like the Ju-87 Stuka struck Polish positions, supply routes, and communication centers to cripple command and control. Other Luftwaffe bombers targeted Polish cities, aiming not only at military objectives but also to terrorize civilians. Some of the first shots of the war came from the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein, ostensibly on a goodwill visit to Danzig, which instead opened fire on the Polish garrison at Westerplatte. The small force of 180 Polish soldiers resisted fiercely for several days, but outnumbered and cut off, they finally surrendered on September 7th. Though the Germans quickly broke through at many points, numerous Polish units fought tenaciously, slowing the advance. A cavalry brigade delayed German tanks at Mokra, and at Krojanty, a skirmish sparked the enduring myth that Polish horsemen had charged German armor. In truth, the Lancers were preparing to attack German infantry when tanks unexpectedly appeared, inflicting heavy losses. The following day, an Italian journalist spoke to German tank crews and exaggerated the story, turning it into propaganda that glorified German technology and mocked supposed Polish recklessness. Other war correspondents, like Kurt Frauwein, reported more humanized scenes from the battlefield. This was the first Polish soldier I saw, a mangled, suffering body, legs drawn up in pain, his face pale and green. We opened his blood-soaked tunic, and the German medic offered him a canteen of water. For a moment, he smiled faintly and whispered the German word, Danke. He died soon after, and now lies beneath a wooden cross. Piekalkiewicz, 79. Polish command struggled to manage the chaos behind the lines and the rapidly shifting situation at the front. On September 3rd, War Minister General Kaspersky ordered the defense of Warsaw. The speed of the German advance stunned the Polish leadership, as many units found themselves trapped in isolated pockets. These encircled forces fought as long as possible, but with dwindling food, ammunition, and continuous air raids, resistance became impossible. As the army braced to defend the capital, Britain and France declared war on Germany on September 3rd. Many Poles viewed this as their only hope of rescue, and civilians like Halina Regulska rejoiced. We embraced each other, kissed, hugged, and danced. Long live England! Now we won't die in this unequal fight. A few hours later, France also declared war on Germany. In Warsaw, there was excitement and street demonstrations, wrote one observer. Böhler 110F. Still, the promised French offensive was not expected to begin for another 2 weeks. In the meantime, the Germans captured Krakow without resistance on September 6th. 2 days later, German armored units reached the outskirts of Warsaw, though Polish troops successfully prevented them from entering. A German report described their struggle to break through. It was useless to attempt an advance here. The brigade ordered a withdrawal. Slowly, with turrets turned backward, the tanks pulled out, covering one another with fire. Riflemen, some panicked, retreating too soon, blocked the route. My dead and wounded lay across the hulls of the tanks. Many never received the retreat order and were left behind. Pullman 308. On September 9th, Polish forces trapped in a large pocket west of Warsaw launched a major counterattack at the Battle of the Bzura. Their aim was to push the Germans back, reopen escape routes, and halt the encirclement of the capital. The engagement became the largest and fiercest battle of the campaign, although the Germans were forced to divert troops from Warsaw, allowing some Polish units to reach the city. Relentless German assaults on the ground and constant Luftwaffe attacks crushed the Polish forces within a week. Around the same time, the last major Polish defenses in the north collapsed at Wisna. Each day, more isolated Polish formations surrendered, and by September 15th, German forces had completely surrounded Warsaw. The Germans demanded unconditional surrender, but the Poles refused. German commanders grew concerned that the defenders might establish a new defensive line farther east between Brest-Litovsk and Lwów, yet German troops reached Lwów before that could happen. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe continued to bombard Polish cities mercilessly, including the capital. One eyewitness described the horror. On Grochow Boulevard, clogged with traffic, German fighter planes swooped from just 100 meters above, machine-gunning refugees, soldiers retreating into Warsaw, and even women heading to the fields to pick potatoes. Corpses and the bodies of horses lay in the streets until evening, as another air raid could begin at any moment. Buller 169. With Warsaw encircled and the Polish army shattered, Poland's faint hopes rested on the promised French offensive. Instead of striking the thinly defended German Western Front in force, however, the French and British offered only limited action. The French made a short advance for a few days, then fell back to the Maginot Line. Meanwhile, on September 17th, the Soviet Union entered the fighting on the side of Germany. From Berlin's perspective, Soviet involvement could not come soon enough. Worried about British and French intervention, the Germans had been pressing Moscow to join the campaign since early September. Although the Soviets permitted limited German use of naval bases at Murmansk and radio facilities for the Luftwaffe in Minsk, Moscow needed time to mobilize and to settle a border conflict with Japan in Mongolia. The Wehrmacht's rapid advance, however, alarmed Stalin, who feared his new partner might not honor their secret agreement. Wanting to avoid the appearance of naked aggression, the Soviets prepared a diplomatic pretext. Vyacheslav Molotov handed a note to the Polish ambassador in Moscow declaring that the Polish government has disintegrated and no longer shows any sign of life, and arguing that Ukrainians and Belarusians living under Polish rule had been left defenseless. Kokonski, 77. The fact that a functioning Polish government and fighting army still existed made little difference. Red. Army orders urged troops to come to the aid of workers and peasants, supposedly. Rising against Polish landlords, an uprising that never materialized. Two Soviet fronts, some 470,000 men with roughly 4,000 tanks, 5,500 guns, and 2,000 aircraft, crossed the border. Opposing them were about 350,000 Polish soldiers, many of whom were unarmed reservists with little heavy weaponry. The invasion caught many Poles off guard. Some even mistook the Red Army for liberators. Janusz Bardak recalled, "Two men shone flashlights in our eyes while others surrounded us. I was astonished to see Soviet uniforms and hear Russian spoken. We were still far from the frontier. I could only hope the mighty Red Army had come to fight the Nazis and expel them from Poland. I wanted to welcome them, but someone ordered us to put up our hands." Morehouse 47. In some areas, especially among Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Jews, the Soviets were greeted with relief in the hope of better treatment than under Polish rule. Combat was limited in many sectors, though Polish troops held off Soviet tanks at Grodno for 2 days using Molotov cocktails and machine guns. In Lwów, already besieged by German forces but located in the Soviet zone, German and Soviet commanders briefly discussed a joint assault before the Germans pulled back. On September 22nd, the two armies even staged a joint parade in Brest-Litovsk, complete with triumphal arches bearing swastikas and red stars. Generals Heinz Guderian and Semyon Krivoshein, who was Jewish, observed the ceremony and spoke together in French. London and Paris were appalled by Soviet actions, but judged that opening a second front against the USSR was too risky. Britain's ambassador in Moscow, William Seeds, put it bluntly. I do not myself see what advantage war with the Soviet Union would be to us, though it would please me personally to declare it on Mr. Molotov. Kochansky, 78. As German and Soviet forces occupied most of Poland, they swiftly imposed reigns of terror in their zones. Because both regimes insisted the Polish state had ceased to exist, they treated Polish citizens as having no rights or protections. The Nazis regarded Slavic Poles and Polish Jews, who comprised about 10% of the population, as subhuman, to be enslaved, expelled, or exterminated. SS leader Reinhard Heydrich stressed the priority of eliminating Polish elites. The people must be shot or hanged immediately without trial. The little people we want to spare, but the nobles, priests, and Jews must be killed. Browning, 17. Yet the atrocities were not confined to the SS alone. Other branches of the occupation apparatus also took part in suppressing and terrorizing the population. Atrocities began almost immediately after the campaign in Poland commenced. Some ethnic German civilians living within Poland formed militias and joined in the violence, while special Einsatzgruppen targeted Polish Jews and intellectuals for execution. In Przemyśl, for example, an Einsatzgruppe shot 500 Jews in mid-September. Regular Wehrmacht units also killed prisoners and civilians. Senior officers such as Franz Halder would later acknowledge that Nazi leadership had made its intentions clear. It was the purpose of the Führer and Göring to destroy and exterminate the Polish people. Browning, 17. In the town of Częstochowa, troops of the 42nd Division massacred about 1,000 civilians, including 150 Jews, under the false claim that civilians had fired on German forces. Helena Spielmann witnessed the massacre. On the town square, several thousand people, men, women, and children, were gathered. The entire area was surrounded by German soldiers with rifles ready. Shh, they searched the Polish and Jewish men. If they found a razor, a knife, or even a blade, that man was taken to a nearby trench and immediately shot. Böhler, 147 FESF. The Germans carried out similar massacres elsewhere under the pretext of imaginary partisan attacks. In total, German forces executed between 12,000 and 15,000 Poles during the 5-week campaign, not including civilians killed in bombing raids. On October 4th, Hitler declared a general amnesty for all Germans who had committed crimes in Poland. The Soviets also engaged in brutal repression within their zone of occupation, executing or imprisoning Polish community leaders, officers, businessmen, and landowners. Thousands were deported to labor camps deep in the Soviet Union, and summary shootings of prisoners were common. After the brief battles of Grodno and Lwów, Soviet troops executed several hundred Polish defenders. During the campaign, there were also violent reprisals by Poles against ethnic Germans. In one notorious incident at Bydgoszcz, enraged civilians killed 223 ethnic Germans, and later estimates suggest the total number of victims may have reached 6,000. Beaver. As the Germans and Soviets consolidated control, Polish military resistance entered its final phase. By late September, only a few Polish strongholds remained: Modlin Fortress, Kock, and Warsaw. The government fled to neutral Romania and later re-established itself in France. The Germans sought to capture Warsaw quickly, but their forces were too few and inexperienced in urban warfare. The Polish garrison of 180,000 troops, though short on heavy weapons and ammunition, fought fiercely from the ruins and barricades. A German officer of the 10th Division described one scene. About 30 military cadets manned a field gun and took cover in a nearby cellar. Whenever one of our tanks appeared, they fired until they were killed. Then others took their place. This single gun destroyed 3 of our assault guns and 1 field piece. Wettstein, 85. The Luftwaffe bombed Warsaw relentlessly, targeting utilities and infrastructure. The city was left without power or water. Civilian Halina Regulska recalled, "Above us raged an inferno. One plane after another dived toward us. Each time it felt certain that we would be hit. The expectation of death made our hearts stand still." Böhler, 174F. On September 25th, 370, German planes dropped incendiaries in what was then the largest air raid in history, killing around 40,000 residents. Warsaw's mayor, Stefan Starczynski, broadcast desperate appeals to Britain and France. And you, our allies who promised us help, what are you doing? That is what the dead and dying are asking. Piekalkiewicz 194. A day later, his tone hardened. For the last time, I call on our allies. I am not asking for help anymore. I demand revenge. For our churches in ashes, for the tears of the innocent, for those burned alive or crushed in cellars. Let the world know, Warsaw is fighting. Poland is not yet lost. Piekalkiewicz 214. By September 28th, shortages of water, disease, and hopeless odds forced Warsaw to surrender. Modlin Fortress fell soon after, and the final Polish pocket at Kock held out until October 6th, marking the end of organized resistance. The Germans celebrated their victory with a parade in Warsaw, filmed by director Leni Riefenstahl. Remnants of the Polish army fled toward neutral borders. Between 80,000 and 200,000 soldiers succeeded in escaping. Some units, such as Captain Romuald Galicki's, clashed with hostile civilians along the way, recalling ethnic tensions of 2 decades earlier. We marched at night with no contact with the enemy. On the way, Ukrainian bands in villages like Stepan, Maniowice, and Ratno were eliminated. Gross, 20. The campaign in Poland was over. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union had achieved their immediate aims. Stalin would soon declare that their friendship is sealed in blood. Both powers adjusted their zones of control. Germany received more Polish territory and vital Soviet raw materials, while the USSR gained the right to incorporate Lithuania into its sphere. Moscow promptly offered Vilnius to Lithuania, which accepted. Germany also granted a small slice of Polish land to the Slovak state. The speed and devastation of the German victory fueled Nazi propaganda portraying the Wehrmacht as unstoppable and gave rise to the enduring myth of blitzkrieg as a perfected strategy. In truth, German commanders believed the army had been thrust into war prematurely and judged its supplies and readiness insufficient for a prolonged conflict with France and Britain. German casualties totaled roughly 15,000 dead, 30,000 wounded, and 3,400 missing, with 217 tanks lost, nearly 10% of their armored force. Soviet losses were around 750 killed and 1,800 wounded. Polish losses were catastrophic. 70,000 to 120,000 soldiers killed, 130,000 wounded, 700,000 captured by the Germans, and 220,000 taken by the Soviets. Between 100,000 and 200,000 civilians also perished. As terrible as the invasion had been, the dual occupation that followed, both German and Soviet, would bring even greater horrors.